EGROW Foundation. As you know, and I repeat it all the time because I am so excited about it, that we in this series, which we have done nearly 250 webinars, had a very clear objective. We started during COVID to discuss contemporary economic issues and bring the best minds in the country to talk about those issues. We also thought we would like to also deal with, interact on global economic issues and get the global perspectives on that. And we have been very fortunate that we have been successful in doing this. Under the G20 presidency, we did 11 webinars on new international economic order. We did 6 on climate, 6 on women empowerment. And then on many contemporary economic issues, we have had the privilege of getting the best minds across the globe to come and speak to us. We have also had the privilege of 3 Nobel laureates already spoken. We are now trying to get them a Nobel laureate for institutions, because I am convinced, and while I was doing my postdoctorate at Harvard, Desmoglu, Darren Esmoglu, who was doing his research preliminary in 2003 on institutions. Even then, I used to think institutions serve as pillars for growth to take place. And now that they have the Nobel Prize and much more work has happened in the last 2 decades, we are trying to get them over on EGROW to come and speak to us about the role of institutions. Especially now, I feel it's so important. If we have to leapfrog into Viksit Bharat, our institutions have to be pillars of steel, and only then we'll be able to do it. So to that extent, EGROW Foundation is making efforts to bring the best minds from across the world and this knowledge to disseminate across our country to the last man in the last college a student should have access to know what's being discussed in the most rigorous way in the best universities of the world. That's the objective, and to some extent, we are fulfilling it. As we all know, the issue of employment is extremely fierce. Elections can be won or lost on this. Fortunately, inflation in the country has not been very high, relatively across the world, but unemployment figures have been contested extremely aggressively by different economies. For a long time, I have been trying to get all of them together and explain what is going on. I'm myself not a labor economist. And me, as a trained economist, I used to find it difficult sometimes to understand what the whole debate is about. Very fortunate that we have had on this issue series of lectures, and today is the 3rd one. And we have had Professor Golder speak to us, Dr. Surjit Bhalla speak to us, Professor Mehrotra speak to us, and Kingshuk Sarkar also speak to us. Today is the last in that series, and we have Mr. Mahesh Vyas, who's the Managing Director and CEO of Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMI, as we all know it. And he joined that in 1980 and taken this current role in 1997. Over 4 decades, he has closely observed significant changes in the Indian economy. He is the chief architect of CMI's proprietary databases, including PROS, CAPEX, and the consumer pyramids household survey. PROS is the largest database on Indian company performance. CAPEX tracks investment projects, and Consumer Pyramids survey is India's largest household panel survey. Mr. Mahesh Vyas writes for CMI's Economic Outlook and leads the analysis team. He is a member of the SEBI Market Data Advisory Committee and has served on various boards, including Geojit Financial Services Limited. He has participated in several government committees, such as the High-Level Committee on Auditor-Company Relationships and Expert Group for Poverty Measurement Methodology. Today, very fortunate that he is coming and speaking to us on these issues. To discuss this subject, another famous professor who has also worked on this subject quite extensively and has been an active member of the debate that has taken place, Professor Santosh Mehrotra is a visiting professor, Center for Development Studies, University of Bath, UK, and former professor economics and chair of the Center for Informal Sector and Labor, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. He has spent 15 years with the UN in research positions heading UNICEF's Global Research Program on Social Economic Policy at the Innocenti Research Center, Florence, and as chief economist of the Global Human Development Report, New York. He returned to India to head the Rural Development Division and the Development Policy Division of the Planning Commission. He was also the Director General of the National Institute of Labor Economics Research Planning Commission in the rank of Secretary to the Government of India. He advises the NITI, the Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Skill Development. He is the lead author of several chapters of the 11th and 12th five-year plans of India and the India Human Development Report. He has a huge number of publications in reputed Indian and foreign journals. He regularly writes on labor issues in various newspapers. His writings have been translated into Hindi, Spanish, French, Russian, German, and Portuguese. With this, I would now like to invite Mr. Mahesh Vyas to share his thoughts and his presentation. And then after that, we will go to Professor Santosh Mehrotra. Mr. Vyas, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charan Singh, for inviting me to speak with all the distinguished people who have gathered today. I have a slideshow, and I will like to share my screen to show that slideshow. It says we can't display your shared content. Make sure that you are allowed permission to share content and then try again. So will the hosts please allow me to share?
Sir, I have given the permission.
Okay, I'll try again. Please bear with me. I'm trying to figure out how this works. Okay.
Alternatively, you could share these slides with us and we'll start but if you can, certainly we would like you to do it. But if you can't, we are happy to play from here.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I have about 24 slides over here to give the story of what I want to say, what's happening to employment in India right now. And let's begin right away. So the first slide, we have been tracking through CMI's Consumer Pyramids Household Survey, employment and unemployment since January 2016. And what I'm presenting in the slides that follow and this one is systematically the quarterly estimations derived from that survey. And this slide shows you what's happening to employment in India since March 2016, since the quarter ended March 2016. All the data that I will be presenting in the slides today are all available and sourced from CMI's Economic Outlook service, which presents the data from the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey besides all kinds of other data. So what we see over here is we began and we saw that India employed about 400 million people in 2016, and this number was falling at a slow but steady pace, possibly because of some shocks that came on the way, like demonetization, etc. Whatever the reasons, what we see is that the employment was not rising, but was declining, and then it fell very sharply in June 2020, in the quarter ended June 2020, in response to the lockdown, and recovered quickly after the lockdown was lifted. You see another blip coming down, which is in response to the second lockdown that was imposed on the country. We had some time before employment started recovering, and good recovery began sometime after September 2022. We have seen employment rise above 400 million only in 2023. There has been some good increase in recent times. So two things have happened. One, we have recovered from the hit of the COVID times. And two, more interestingly, we are seeing an increase in the employment compared to a declining trend. So this is the large takeaway that I have from the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey derived data on employment in India. These numbers, as you see, 450 million or so, are lower than estimates made from the PLFS. There's a difference in the way we define employment. But what is important is it is the same methodology, which is applied from 2016 through 2024 with fast frequency data. We release even monthly data, but for a better perspective, I've used quarterly data. So the methodology is same, it is different, but same. It shows that employment was falling. It kind of collapsed in the lockdown and took a long time to recover and now is rising. But in spite of these changes in rising employment, we see that the employment quality is quite poor. So I break up the employment into two kinds of employment. One is farmers and wage laborers. They are not only farm or agricultural wage laborers. There are all kinds of wage laborers over here. So farmers and wage laborers have a lower wage rate is what we see in the data as well. So this is relatively poor quality employment, and business persons and salaried employees are better paid people. What we see is that although there is a rise in the red line, there is still a large gap between business persons and salaried employees who are better quality employed people compared to farmers and wage laborers. So there is a significant dominance of relatively poor quality employment in India, and I say this only from the point of view of what a person earns by being a farmer or a wage laborer. It is not to demean the work. The work, of course, we respect all kinds of work. It is just to say it is poor quality in the sense what is the remuneration that a person working as a farmer and a wage laborer gets. So this is not a qualitative, judgmental, poor quality, good quality, but a quantitative one based on the earning capacity of these occupations. I will now want to break up these to dive a little more into what is happening within farmers and wage laborers and within business persons and salaried employees. So here is a breakup of that top line that we saw over here. This green line is broken up now into two components. Small traders and wage laborers saw a very sharp fall after demonetization. So particularly it was small traders who took a big hit, and in my estimation, many of them left the labor markets. It just became non-remunerative for them to survive. It was the jobs and the kind of work they were doing had gone, and therefore these people, particularly women in the small trader wage laborer zone, quit. And therefore we see a very sharp fall in small traders and wage laborers. And during COVID times, of course, they were the ones that were hit extremely badly. And their employment fell really dramatically in those times. It has recovered, and it has recovered to what it was before the COVID hit us. It hasn't gone up again. So it seems to have stabilized small traders and wage laborers at a level of 120 million or thereabouts. Farmers have been steadily rising. And Professor Mehrotra has commented a lot on this and thrown a lot of light on this from the PLFS data. We also see from the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey data, a completely independent survey conducted by a private company like CMI, using slightly different definitions. Even we see a huge reversal of development where people are going back to becoming farmers. This seems to be the result of the stress that that initially demonetization caused, some amount of GST caused, lack of employment in the economy at large, is led to a steady reverse migration of people going back to the farms. When the COVID came in, the influx became sharper. So as you can see in the quarter ended June 2020, you see the gradient of the green line shooting up significantly. The farmers are not actually necessarily farmers. They are people who were doing something else. They went back home because they had come from the villages and declared themselves as farmers because they had a small piece of land that maybe their father, their brother, or their cousins were tilling. And now they joined the same group to till the same small piece of land. And they obviously declared themselves as farmers. They would not declare themselves as wage laborers. Some of them would go back as wage laborers, but many of them went back to their land and declared themselves as farmers. What we see is that they remained there for a fairly long time, even through the second lockdown, and it took some time for the number of people seen in farmers coming down. Yet it never went down to where it was before 2016. So farmers have gone back, but they haven't gone back entirely. They're still there. They still remain intact in their farms, which means that the alternate employment opportunities are not great elsewhere. So although we have seen an increase in employment, in total employment, people who went to the farms stayed back there, or largely stayed back over there, because there weren't adequate jobs available in urban India or in non-farm sectors. So this is important, and we will know a little more about what's going on as we move ahead. So this is a kind of an enigma unfolding itself slowly. So please bear with me. The next slide tells us a little about the other line that we saw over here in this slide, which was the business persons and salaried employees rising. We see we disaggregate this to see what's going on. Salaried employees was not growing. The blue line had remained more or less stagnant between 85 and 90 million, and in COVID it fell. And it took a long time, all the way till 2023, before it could regain the level that it had before COVID. So from 2020 till 2023, more than three and a half years, salaried employment was lower than it was in the pre-COVID time. And in the recent past, it has increased and increased quite well. And we will try to disentangle that to try to understand what's going on over there. But what is remarkable is the business persons. Business persons, there is a very steady rise and a very sharp rise. So number of people declaring themselves as business persons increased quite sharply from 2016 onwards. They took a small hit in the COVID times, and at a lower rate, they started recovering. But they did start recovering. The trajectory or the gradient, the slope of the red line before 2020 is much sharper than the gradient after 2020. But nevertheless, entrepreneurship did not peter out. It continued to rise. So we need to understand what's going on. If business persons is rising so well, then salaried employees must increase as well, because a business person is usually a person who employs other people. We in CMI, we do not distinguish between own account enterprises and other enterprises, because it's okay. I respect what PLFS is doing. They're doing it differently, because an own ownership enterprise does kind of grow to hire at least some people later on. So we like to see this transition, saying you begin as a self-employed person, then you hire one, engage one additional person, grow a little more, and then you either survive or you fall apart. Whichever way, enterprise is expected to grow, and therefore we call all these people as business persons. They are of all kinds. There is a steady rise over here, and it is a little enigmatic. Why does it not lead to employment? Because entrepreneurship, in principle, theoretically, should lead to more salaried employees, and it is not. This is the slide that shows that. You see, this is the slide of salaried employees per business person. It was 1.7. It was a poor ratio anyway. For every one businessman, we had less than 2 salaried employees. So it's a pretty low number. Of course, it's a large aggregate of all kinds of firms over here, but it's a pretty low number. It shows that the quality of entrepreneurship in India is very, very small. And even this number, through the economic shocks that we saw in recent times, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, we have seen this leading to the salaried employees per business person dropping and then stabilizing just above 1. For every one businessman, there is 1 salaried employee. That's a very, very low number. And it just shows that most of this, or largely, the increase in the entrepreneurs, businessmen that we saw earlier was actually a reclassification of people who were small traders into a business person, possibly because they got some maybe mudra loans or some such cheap finance available through various initiatives of the government to promote entrepreneurship, particularly very small entrepreneurs. Very small amounts of loans were given out of the order of 10 lakh rupees or less, and that could have converted some of them to say, I'm not a hawker anymore, I'm actually a business person who has got a small amount of asset against me, and I've also got a loan against me. So that's what is going on, which led to the increase in entrepreneurship. Here I show small traders and wage laborers declining and then stabilizing, and business persons rising. And on top, if I see this business persons and small traders, the black line on top is the summation of the blue and the red line. What I'm trying to show over here is that the sum of the two is more or less constant. So it's merely a movement from small traders to wage laborers that is going on. So although the blue line declined and stabilized and the red line rose and stabilized, the black line is more or less stable, except for that June 20 quarter, which was only because of the COVID shutdown. But if you remove that little blip, you will see the black line is a lot more stable, particularly from 2018 onwards. So from Jan 2018 onwards till now, the black line is steady, although the blue line, which is small traders and wage laborers, decline and business persons rise. It just means that these people are just moving their positions. So that's what I think is going on over here. It's not actually entrepreneurship. So what was happening? The black line that we saw initially and that turnaround in employment was actually an increase of 32 million people on a base of around 400 million, which increased between September 2022 and September 2024, these 2 years. We see a 32 million increase in employment, and the breakup that we saw the increase is most significant, 16 million in salaried employees, 9.4 million in business persons, 8.3 in farmers, and small traders and wage laborers declined by 1.6. And my claim is that 1.6 went into 9.4 and 8.3 farmers remained more or less where they were. So people moved into farms and stayed there. People who are small traders and wage laborers moved into becoming business persons, and there was the strange increase in salaried employees. And I think that happened. The data does tell us this, that it was that when the people moved from urban India into rural India and occupied the farms, and I use the term occupied in a deliberate way, the number of hands available in farms increased. As the number of hands in farms increased and the uncertainties around COVID increased, these farm households did not have a good reason to engage adequate wage laborers. So a large number of the farmers, the new farmers that entered the farms in this time, displaced wage laborers, and wage laborers had to move out. And where did they go? We will find out. But the story over here is, it's not that the farmers went in over there and just increased that hand over there, and these people are willing to feed those wage laborers. Farms could not have taken more than what the influx was giving them. They had to reduce the number of mouths to feed from that farm sector. And that's what I think led to some of the agricultural wage laborers losing out and trying to find jobs elsewhere. We will unravel this as we move ahead. So I called all this as the story 1, and I'll have a story 2 coming up. So what I claim over here is demonetization, GST, and COVID drove non-farm labor to farms, and the farms increased 25 million between 16 and 20, and 16 to 24, the increase is still 20.6 million farmers. So Professor Mehrotra has shown the increase is 80 million. I say it is 20.6. Our definitions are a little different. But still, what is important is for several years, at least from the 1990s or late 1980s through till recently, we were taking people out of farms and pushing them into construction and manufacturing. Here, we have a reverse migration where 20 million people have moved back into farms, not accounting for the shock of the 2020 shutdown. Farmers have displaced agricultural laborers. We estimate this to be a 6.6 million displacement. Mudra loans and other schemes, and there are many other schemes, have helped create 36 million, have helped create entrepreneurs, and we see a 36 million increase in entrepreneurs. I can't give credit to Mudra and such schemes alone, but there is a transition in favor of entrepreneurs. They could be just, self-employed entrepreneurs not engaging anyone. New entrepreneurs could not create employment between 2016 and 2024. Salaried employees to entrepreneurs fell by 0.6. So this is a reasonably grim story of what happened in the last 7.5 years. But we still have a story to unravel. Why did salaried employees increase recently? And we'll try and solve that in the next few slides. So this is a different cut of the same data. That was by what I call as occupation, farmers and wage laborers and business persons and salaried employees. Here I cut them up by the sectors of the economy: agriculture, industry, and services. And what we see is agriculture employment is stable. This includes farmers and agricultural wage laborers combined. Industry has dropped and has not recovered. Agriculture has just stayed where it was. Services took a long time to recover from the COVID shock, but since September 23, it has shot up sharply. So that's where the story is, and we'll come to it. I break down, like in the earlier slides, I break down industry, and what I find over here is construction is showing signs of fatigue, is hiring less people since 2023. So what I think is that this huge influx of people that went back to the farms, and there was an oversupply of labor in farms. There is also an oversupply of labor in construction, and construction itself is not growing very well. A combination of these two things, which means that the low skilled labor that went back to the farms and then joined construction has lost that opportunity to work in construction as well. So farms were flooding with people, and construction was not occupying them, was not employing them, sorry. So then where do they go? Industry is not giving them much hope. The next slide gives us the answer. They have all become personal, non-professional services people. You see this sharp increase in personal, non-professional services. This is the major breakup of services sector. So services saw the blip, this huge spike in recent times. That spike has come entirely from personal, non-professional services. But I think we should look at this slide a little more. And what I see is that after COVID, the red line on top, which is trade, which is wholesale and retail trade, saw a pretty sharp increase from about 60 million people employed to nearly 75 million people employed. It's quite significant. This is all your people standing in malls, behind shops, delivery boys, Swiggy, quick service home. That shot up very sharply. It did not grow beyond that, has stagnated at about 70 to 75 million. It used to be only around 60 million or so, before that even 40 million. But in 7 years, it has moved from 40 million to almost a doubling till 75 million. So that's a huge increase in wholesale and retail trade. The second story is more recent, that after there was a stagnation in employment opportunities, not very well paying jobs of Swiggy boys, we see an increase in non-personal professional services. These are mostly personal, skilled and unskilled workers, and the next slide will tell us what that is. You can see education has taken a very long time to recover. Hotels and tourism has still not recovered from the number of people it employed around COVID. So it's even declined after having come up a little bit. So what was that that blue line that went up? Personal, non-professional services. That's in the second part. The top part is the breakup of trade, includes wholesale and retail trade. Retail dominates this one. It includes people working in mandis and other wholesale markets. Retail trade includes people working in shops, malls, ration shops, hawkers, florists, petrol pump workers, photocopying machines, mobile phone, pan bidi shops. So a whole kind over here are in trade. Personal non-professional services is where the huge influx has happened after agriculture became overstuffed with people, and construction failed to give them jobs. They all went to become barbers, beauticians, freelance physical trainers, drivers, handymans, roadside cobblers, domestic help, cooks, dhobies, watchmen, newspaper distributor, gardeners, hall decorators, parking charge collectors, beggars, prostitutes. We consider beggars and prostitutes as legitimate employed people, and their wages are taken into account. That's not the case in NSO, but we think they are employed when they're doing whatever they're doing. So this is where the big increase has come, and this is where the people who came out of the farm sector, the wage laborers over there, and came out of construction, that's where they have landed at. The point is, and mind you, when they take up jobs of many of these kinds, like a domestic help or a cook, or a watchman, they all become salaried employees because they're not doing what in Hindi we call as dehadi ki earning. They're not earning on a per hour basis or a per day basis. They do get a very small wage, but it is still a salaried employment. They may be getting no paid leaves. It's a pretty lousy employment arrangement, but still it is salaried employment. And that's the reason why we saw that big increase in salaried employment earlier. So we shouldn't take all salaried employment as very good quality employment. So here are we. The big increase, the same 32 million, the major movements in that 32 million is 20 million became non-professional personal services, which includes a large part of the salaried employees over here. Not all, but many of them. 10 million went to manufacturing. Other services, which is other than the non-professional personal services, got 6.6. Agriculture got 5, which is farmers and agri-wage laborers. Trade got 2.5, and mining and utilities a little, and construction saw a big fall. So the turnaround actually is not in salaried jobs as good quality jobs. It's actually in poor quality jobs. So this is my story too. And this slide tells us the same things. I will not repeat them to save time. Now, in spite of this increase in employment that we saw, and we saw its disaggregation, story 3 tells us labor participation rate is still lower than it was in the pre-COVID time, and that's a big difference. We were at around 46% labor participation rate according to CMI. This dropped quite sharply in COVID, but we are still below 42%. So this, I think, is the most distressful story of employment in India, that the labor participation rate is falling, has thankfully stabilized, but at a lower rate. Now, there will be a difference in the definition and so on and so forth, but it is the same definition that I hold from 2016 till 2024, and I find that the labor participation rate is falling. The employment rate, which I think is the most important indicator in all that we see over here, which is the proportion of the working age population that has actually got a job. Even this, the story is like labor force participation rate. We have fallen from around 42% to 38%. And this had fallen quite low in the COVID times, and it has recovered, but recovered partially. The recovery is good in recent times, but it seems to be seeing fatigue in the recent 6 months when it is not rising anymore. So that's the case in labor participation rate as well, where the fatigue began a little earlier, and I see the fatigue in the employment rate as well, that we are seeing fatigue over here. And this slide, the unemployment rate. You see, this is not as telling, not as illuminating as this slide is. The employment rate is what matters, because this is the proportion of the working age population that is employed, that is working. And this is pretty low. This is what matters to us. This is where the policy focus needs to be. This is only the ratio, unemployment rate is only the ratio of those people who are seeking jobs and not getting it. So it is unemployed as a proportion of the labor force. So it doesn't tell us the story of the falling labor participation rate. So these 3 slides tell us, while there is a recovery in the employment, while there is an increase in employment in recent times, we don't see that to be adequate to turn around this story. This employment rate needs to turn around. So that's the same thing I say over here. Story 3 is labor participation rate has stabilized at a low level. Employment rate is stabilizing at a low level. And unemployment rate is stabilizing at a high level of around 8%. 8% is high. And I think that's what we should worry about, that if you have even 8% open unemployment, there could be people who would, have reasons to say, I'd like to get a job if I get one, but I'm not looking for one right now. then I think this becomes an inadequate indicator, and I think open unemployment at 8% is far too high. Gender chasm. Employment is largely about men, very little about women, and there is a big improvement, but there is. Now this is an interesting slide which I was very pleased to see. The share in employment in the quarter ended September 2022. Look at the left slide. Share in employment in September 2022, 91% was men, 9% was women. This is CMI's very stringent employment definition. Between September 2022 and September 2024, incrementally, the share of women is 41%. So something interesting is happening over here. The watchmen are not women. The drivers are largely not women. So women are finding jobs elsewhere. It's an enigma that requires to be resolved. But I'm extremely pleased to see this slide that incrementally women are joining the labor force in a much bigger way and being employed. But we have an unfair deal with them still, that in the quarter ended September 2024, although the labor participation rate for women is very low at 11.2% compared to 68% for men, the unemployment rate, even with such a low labor participation rate, the unemployment rate is higher, more than double that of men. While men face an unemployment rate of 7.2%, women face a much steeper, bigger challenge of an unemployment rate of 15.4%. So that's an unfair deal, is what I have to say over here. So this is my last slide. Employment was sliding till September 2022, has turned around. Salaried employment has risen, but is of poor quality. Entrepreneurship has improved, but is of poor quality. Labor participation rate still lower than in 2019. Employment rate still lower than 2019. Unemployment rate is elevated at about 8%. A big gap between male and female employment. Female employment has been rising, has seen a big increase recently. Female labor continues to face a very unfair deal. So that's it. Thank you very much. And before we open up to question answers, Dr. Charan Singh, I would like to show some things about how we work at CMI. So these are additional slides, and there are two slides that I'll stop at so that you know what is the difference between CPHS and PLFS. So Consumer Pyramids Household Survey is a pan-India survey, captures fast frequency data. CPHS is different. And the next 4 or 5 slides will tell you what is different. It's a continuous survey. It never stops. So it is administered thrice in a year. Jan 1st to April 30th is, we call that as one wave. And the very next day, May 1st, the next wave begins, continues till August 31. Then the next wave begins September 1st, ends on December 31st. So the entire sample is surveyed from Jan 1st to April 30, then again from May 1st to August 31st, and again from September 1 to December 31, and the cycle goes on again. So CPHS never stops. It has never stopped till now. Our idea is to get fast frequency data, and that's where we began. Our data collection is 100% mobile app based from day one, 100% supervisor check in near real time, 1,000 households interviewed per day. End of day, this data of 1,000 households is available for immediate use. No post hoc removal of any outliers. We are very confident
Mahesh,
of our methods.
Mahesh, are you using a PowerPoint? Because the
Yeah.
slide is not moving. The
Oh,
slide that I see is only thank you slide.
oh, I see. Okay. I don't know what went wrong because I opened a new slide.
You have to reshare with the new
I have to
slides.
reshare. Okay, I will reshare. Thank you for pointing this out. Hmm. Give me a minute, please. Ouch. What did I do? Sorry. Dr. Charan Singh, can you see the slide now?
No.
Sorry, I'm a little clumsy, but I'll get there. Can you see it now?
No.
What's wrong?
It doesn't matter, Mahesh. They're not pictures. They're bits of text. If I remember, if you
Yes,
assume they shouldn't be pictures.
there are no pictures.
So in that case, why don't you just talk about it? Because that's what's most important. Because you can
Okay,
already
I
see
will.
people
I will.
getting edgy.
Sorry.
Mesh, if you
No,
want, you
just
can.
go ahead.
Okay, so
Mesh?
what I'll do is I'll just talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. Just point out the major differences.
Yeah, I'll tell
Yeah.
you what the difference is.
All right.
So the employment is defined stringently in the CPHS. So a person who is engaged in an economic activity for wages or profits on the day of the interview or the previous day, if the day status is unclear, is considered employed. So this is elementary. This is what the whole world does. If a person is engaged in an economic activity for wages or profits, then he is considered employed. We are sticklers about this being on the day of the interview or the previous day. Paid or unpaid holidays, leaves are employed days if continuity of employment is reasonably assured. This is also true in the NSSO. Full-time work on family business is considered employed even if no wages are paid or no profits are shared in cash, if the returns from the business are well shared within the joint family. Example, if a husband and wife run a farm full-time together or two brothers run a shop full-time together, they are considered employed. So this is close to what the NSSO does as well. Business persons who receive no wages but receive only profits is also considered employed. Now, this is all okay. The difficulty is part-time family labor for no wages or profits is not employment. Employment for only 1 hour in a week does not justify assigning the employment status to the person. So these 2 points, please pay attention. Part-time family labor for no wages or profits is not employment in our system. Employment for only 1 hour in a week, and we don't even consider a week, does not justify assigning the employment status to the person. This is the big difference from the NSSO. And the reference period for the economic activity status is a day and not a 7-day period. The status is therefore unambiguous. When you have a 7-day reference period, a person could be employed on 2 days, unemployed on 2 days, and out of the labor force for 3 days. So there's unambiguity, there's ambiguity in deciding what the status should be, and what the official authorities do is they have an arbitrary priority assignment. to priority assignment to employment status in the 7-day preference. We don't face such a problem at all because we are taking only 1 day. And in that 1 day, there's no ambiguity. You're either employed on the day or you're not employed on the day. So this is a second difference. The first difference is we are stringent. We don't take a 7-day period. We don't take part-timers who are not paid. Next, unemployment has 2 flavors in CPHS. This is not there in the NSSO. Unemployed, willing and actively looking for employment are the ones that we call as unemployed, but we have another one which is the gray shade. Unemployed, willing to work but not actively looking for employment. We don't use this much publicly, but we do capture this and it's available to all researchers. Then, occupation is independent of employment. We don't conflate the two. We ask occupation independently, we ask employment independently. Occupation for us covers all economic and non-economic activities. So these are the big differences. Employment and unemployment status is marked independent of occupation. Therefore, a student can be employed as well. So because India has got a large number of people who work, who study in what is called as BCom, particularly in large parts of Bombay and many other towns nowadays because they become CAs. BCom is only a 3-hour lectures in the morning. The rest of the time, these people are working, they're earning. So in the NSSO, if you're a student, you can't be employed. In CPHS, you could be a student and you can be employed if you are also working. So this increases the number of employment people in the CPHS, but it's very small. Students is not a big deal. Employment is marked independent of wage earning. It is rare but possible to find people who were employed but did not get any wages. This happened during the COVID times. There were people who were, when the thing was lifted, there were people who were paid, who were not paid, although they were employed. We captured that. So this independence of employment capture from occupation, from wages, gives us more play to understand the labor markets in India. So this is the important part, Professor Mehrotra, that I wanted to read out, and that's the only part that really matters. The rest is all just background information. If anyone wants me to repeat any of these things, I will be happy to do so. And with that, I actually end my presentation.
Quick question, Maheshji. This PowerPoint which you have, very informative, and the portion that you read from, because that in a very clear way mentions how the dimensions of your survey results are different. Because your assumptions are different, your definitions are different.
Yes.
So would you be comfortable in sharing these, and should we put it in public domain, or you will have some reservation?
No. This is for public, and all this information, Dr. Charan Singh, is anyway publicly available. I'm not revealing anything new.
Then
For the
kindly
last,
share this. Then kindly
Sure.
share this PPT and the one which you were reading from. Then we'll put it along with your talk.
Sure. Both the PPTs will be delivered to you right away.
With that, let me now invite Professor Mehrotra to share his thoughts. Professor.
Thank you very much. I suspect that the host has turned off my video because I'm not being able to turn on my video at this end.
Come on, this is not the parliament.
This is not. I mean, I don't need to. I don't need to have my video.
Why would we turn down your?
Okay, I mean, for whatever reason, I can't turn my video on, so I'm just explaining to you that I can't turn it.
Kindly try once again. We have not done.
No, I've been trying throughout that before Mahesh started, during Mahesh speaking, I failed. So I don't know. I mean, I've tried many times over, and for whatever reason, it's not working.
Vivek, can you help him? Vivek? Professor Mehrotra, can you just try logging out and logging in? Because before we started, you were on the video. I could see you.
Really? Well, I don't know what happened. So let me.
Yeah.
So prefer leaving the meeting and rejoining in a second.
Yeah, sure. In the meantime, Mahesh, would you like reading through the chat box? There are a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Yeah. So by the time he comes back, you would have gone through. I thought there were some very good questions there.
Oh my God. Wonderful. I guess all I needed to do was to exit and rejoin.
Absolutely. There you are.
Wonderful. Okay. So can I start, Doctor?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So for those of you who either read my work or seen my presentation in this seminar series, you will probably appreciate and understand that the story that is emerging from a very different data source like CMIE is rather consistent with the story that I told you, and it is not quite agreeing with what Professor Goldar or Dr. Bhalda were telling us. So let me just point out 3 or 4 things that needs to be driven home. First of all, the CMI data is telling us that unlike the PLFS is claiming that the LFPR has risen, the WPR has risen, and the unemployment rate has fallen. That I had unraveled that mystery completely in my presentation, and some of that I will refer to again. But the point is, and this is the bottom line, all your audience must understand this. I had pointed this out in my own presentations, that PLFS data is not internationally compliant and is not using the definitions that are used internationally now for the last 10 years. CMI's data is ILO compliant, it is internationally compliant. I could elaborate on this, but for the moment, in the interest of time, I will not. The fact of the matter is that I want to emphasize that the PLFS data is misleading us by telling us that the LFPR is rising and the WPR is rising. And why it is misleading us is because of the definitional differences, a subject I'll come back to. I just want to re-emphasize the point that Mahesh just made, that the LFPR has actually fallen in the last 8 years from 47% to 41%. And it has fallen, I mean, it had already begun to fall significantly before COVID began. It was already 43% from 47 in 2020. If you look at Mahesh's slides, that's what I noticed just now. It's only fallen a little bit more since COVID. So let us not blame everything on COVID. And in any case, I think the argument I made, and I want to remind listeners who have listened to both, that I was saying there were, policy mistakes, and the policy-induced mistakes resulted in the economy contracting during COVID to a much greater extent than it need have. The global economy contracted by only 3.1%. Our economy contracted by 5.8%. So this is the first thing I want to emphasize. The WPR, worker participation, which is the share of the working age population which has work, Mahesh has just been telling us, is down from 43% to 37%, a 6 percentage point decline in a matter of 8 years. Please remember that when we compare India, which is still an LMIC, it has hundreds of millions of poor people. The fact of the matter is that the world average for the internationally compliant definition, which is what CMI is, the international comparison tells us that global LFPR and WPR on average is about 60%. We're already at only we were already low. We have come down in respect of both LFPR and WPR. This is nothing short of a crisis, which is the phrase I had used earlier, and I am re-emphasizing that. Let's just turn to the unemployment rate. We were just reminded by one of your persons who put up on the chat that the PLFS is claiming an unemployment rate of 3.1 or 3.2%. I'll explain why it is claiming a 3.2% unemployment rate when Mahesh's unemployment rate or CMI's unemployment rate is 8%. And that's what is based on our internationally compliant definition. So now and by the way, there is another dimension to this which I wished Mahesh had spoken about, and I'm sure if we ask him now, and in a sense I'm asking him because I know that he knows the answer. What about youth? You see, one of the very important reasons why the PLFS is indicating rising LFPR, rising WPR, falling unemployment rate is because a very significant share of those who have joined work or are showing themselves as quote unquote working. And I think Mahesh was absolutely right in querying that, because they say we are working in agriculture, but actually they're doing nothing because there is nothing to do. The marginal productivity of labor in agriculture is zero. And youth who have all gotten better educated, they have joined agriculture. It's not just that. It's also that the PLFS believes that unpaid family labor by a woman, by a child, unpaid family labor is regarded as employment. Actually, ILO regards that as work, but it's not. It's not treated as employment either by the CIMI or by the ILO, but the PLFS does. And because it does that, and youth have, yes, are showing themselves in agriculture, showing themselves as doing unpaid family labor, especially girls who've gotten educated. This is a tragic dimension of the evolution of employment in the last 8 to 10 years. So that's my third point. There's a fourth point that I think I was emphasizing, and which was shown by the CMI data. What is that? It's not just that the overall labor market is in crisis with the LFPR, WPR, and you are being what it is, as I have just been talking about. There's been a reversal of the process of structural change that was going on. What do I mean by that? We all know that in a developing economy, you don't want an increase in the share of agriculture. You don't want an increase in the absolute number of workers in agriculture. What have we seen? An absolute increase in the number of workers in agriculture. There are variations between CMI and us on the PLF on account of the definitions, on the numbers that have actually returned to agriculture, but the trend is overwhelming. In other words, what we are seeing is that a 15-year trend from 2004-5. Let me just recall for the benefit of all our listeners. And from independence till 2004, the absolute number of workers in agriculture was always rising, although the share of agriculture and employment was falling. The absolute number of workers in agriculture was still always rising because the pace of structural change was slow. It is only since 2004-5 that for the first time we see an absolute decline in the number of workers in agriculture. The labor market in rural areas tightens as a result of that, and real wages increase. And that has a knock-on effect on urban real wages, and as a result of which overall poverty in absolute terms falls, meaning the number of poor in the country falls by 140 million between 2004 and 2012, as I had pointed out. And this evidence is there for all of us to see in the Planning Commission's estimates of the Tendulkar basis. Now the point is that in India's history, on a consistent poverty line, the absolute number of people who were poor had never fallen until 2004. For the first time in India's history, it falls because we were pulling workers out of agriculture, and we were pulling workers out of agriculture because we were generating non-farm jobs at a much faster rate. Now, that pace of non-farm job creation has fallen as the CMI data has only confirmed. That story emerges quite clearly, and this manufacturing data in CMI that Mahesh has just presented is actually gone on to. Now, unfortunately, although Mahesh didn't present real wage data, although they collect real wage data. You see, my story was a broader story about which I connected to the shocks induced to the economy, which resulted in real wages stagnating over the last 8 to 10 years. They've been stagnating since 2013. They've stagnated till 17, 18, and since then again they've stagnated across sectors, across rural areas, across urban areas. Now, perhaps Mahesh might be able to, maybe willing to talk about it, because this is a very central part of the entire real wage story, because it has much to do with demand, which I'll come back to in the last. Let me make one other point about women joining the labor force, which Mahesh pointed out that particularly between 22 and 24, there's been of the increment in total employment that has taken place, 40% is accounted for by women. Now, let's just remember that, because I've discussed this in my own presentations, I want to sort of dwell on that just for a couple of minutes, if I may. Please remember that a significant share of the increase in female LFPR is in agriculture. It's not just in unpaid family labor, it is women in unpaid family labor in agriculture, but also in urban areas, because unpaid family labor increases by about 40 to 45 million over a 6 or 7 year period, and in rural areas, and by another 5 million in urban areas. So, in other words, it is, if LFPR of women has increased, it's not showing any positive trend, because it is A, it's in agriculture, B, it's unpaid family labor, most of it. There's some increase of urban regular work of women as well, because they've gotten better educated. Mahesh didn't parse that. He didn't clarify that. There is only some. Now, the point in all of this is, I believe, the following: that if we are not seeing, if the kind of growth and consumption demand that we would like to see in an economy which is supposedly, we are being told repeatedly, become the fastest growing large economy in the world, growing at 8% per annum, how come consumption is not rising? How come the household consumption expenditure survey of 22-23, which has just been released, is showing that over that 10-year period, consumption expenditure has risen by only 3.5%, when the growth rate of the economy is much more than that. That's point one. Point two is that all the other evidence that's emerging is that, and this is from the organized sector, and because CMI actually monitors that data, I'm sure Mahesh will have something to say about this, that we know that we are seeing that the middle class is not expanding. The CEO of Nestle just yesterday or 2 days ago spoke about this, and he is saying that our markets are shrinking. Now, all this is actually further grist to the mill of the argument that we are making, which is that real wages are not increasing, non-farm employment is hardly increasing, And that is why the open unemployment rate is 8%, not the 3% that the PLFS claims. The PLFS claim of 3% is based entirely on the phenomenon of UFL, unpaid family labor, and a significant part of that is also because of the agriculture. So what we are seeing, in other words, are structural constraints, and I'm closing, structural constraints emerging to our sustained growth rate. The 7 or 8% growth claimed is itself questionable. I could dwell on that, but I won't in the interest of time. We were always the second fastest growing large economy for 20 years. It's just that the Chinese growth rate has come down. So we've become the so-called fastest growing. The fact of the matter is that very, very clear evidence is emerging that we are entering a middle income trap, as the World Bank's World Development Report has most recently shown. And the World Development's WDR has said very clearly, has warned that India is at risk of having entered the middle income trap. So instead of continuing to wallow in our illusions about becoming a high income country in 20 years, we have to worry about how we're going to escape the middle income trap. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think we have had an excellent discussion over the last 3 weeks, and of course today again. Very happy that Mahesh Vyas could come and be with us and share these details with us and articulate them so well. There are a couple of questions in the chat box, and I was wondering if Mahesh, would you like to handle them? One of it, of course, Professor Mehrotra has answered. Mahesh, I can't hear you.
You are muted, bhai. You're muted.
Sorry. After so many years, we still have this problem. I'm sorry. So Santosh has already answered the question about PLFS 3.2%. So I'll skip that one. So let me see. When people from agriculture move to services sector, the situation will create fluctuation in the economy. I think Professor Mehrotra has answered this question. We don't want people to stay in low productivity agricultural sector. Our structural change has always been to move people out of farms and take them to manufacturing and construction. So there is no problem of fluctuation in the economy and so on and so forth. The PLFS says that Professor Mehrotra has dealt with. Let me go down. Sorry. CPHS data is useful. Okay. I can't make this available freely. It's a paid subscription. But you know, if you're a part of a university, then it becomes easy for you to use this. We have to charge because we don't use taxpayers' money to create this database. Then, can the primary sector become the engine for growth and employment? Can the primary sector become? If you are a mineral rich country, if you can exploit agriculture with very high technology, it can make a difference. But I think, India is quite well endowed with both of them, and it can be used as a part of our growth engine. But I think we have learned that growing the industrial sector and the services sector has got a much better return. The productivity in the two is much higher than the primary sector. So we have moved beyond merely using the primary sector for our growth. Can agriculture provide desirable jobs? Professor Mehrotra is the big master on that. Can is a loaded question. Should is the more effective question, and I think it's more important for us to move away from agriculture, use more productivity over there. It's excess on labor already. Are the beggars wage employed or self-employed? They are self-employed unless, and this is there in the CMI documentation, unless the beggars are employed by a contractor. And I know this happens in Bombay, and I'm sure this happens in many other parts of the country. The footpaths of Bombay are auctioned. The footpaths of Bombay are auctioned to the biggest bidder, who's a thug or something equivalent to that, and that thug brings beggars from the outskirts of India for daily wage labor. So beggars can also be salaried employees because they're employed by a thug to occupy a footpath that he has paid for. So it can be more interesting than.
Mahesh, you must do a paper on this. A short piece, in any case, a newspaper piece you must do.
Why do you call them a thug?
Okay.
He's creating jobs.
Oh yes, I agree with you. I apologize, sir. I apologize. They are creating jobs.
At least he's
So
handling migration. He's giving them a
yes,
job.
yes, yes, yes. So
And the survey these
uh,
guys do is extensive. Each guy has to be maintained by this so-called contractor, and therefore his earning has to be more than the cost he incurs on the beggar.
that's right. See, Dr. Charan Singh knows more than I know.
Yeah,
So,
because I was in Bombay.
oh, okay, there you go. Let's move on. Can agroecological farming help in any way? Of course it can, but it's not the solution for employment. Unemployment rate is very high in recent years, and this was evident in the saving rate, but I'm surprised how the share market is doing well. That's an enigma, and we are trying to solve the problem by controlling those runaway derivative market people. So that's a different story. We have this K-shaped recovery, which explains this question. What number and percentage of enterprises have zero employees? No. Enterprises don't have zero employees. They may be employing zero people. Matlab ke they don't have. There's one person who's running the enterprise. It's a self-run, self-owned enterprise, and that person doesn't hire anymore. But an enterprise does have a person employed in it. You will have, and welcome to Bombay again. You will have many coca companies which have no one employed over there and nothing at all, excepting this is a transfer of money from one company to another to hide transactions. So, but we don't call them as enterprises. Keep that aside. But usually, this is not really relevant because enterprises should have people, at least one person employed. But I should also be honest to your question. We don't have such data as well. But maybe Santosh Mehrotra, who is more familiar with the PLFS data, will be able to tell you whether such analysis has been done. What is the proportion of uh, uh, self-owned enterprises? Professor Mehrotra is around 80% or so.
Uh, Self-owned meaning own account workers.
Own account, yes, own account.
84% of all non-farm enterprises are own account enterprises or own account workers. Yeah.
Okay.
Meaning,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
In case of entrepreneurs, they are recovering at a lower rate. What about quality of entrepreneur with the help of Mudra loans? Is it a benefit to the society or still remains poor? That's a difficult question. I mean, I shouldn't answer that without doing research on this. But from what I have seen so far from other angles, I see that these loans have not really kicked off entrepreneurship. It would be difficult to see that they are more like a lease line given to save somebody from deep distress. But the quality of entrepreneurship from a 10 lakh rupee loan can't be much. It barely pays the wages of an entrepreneur. So I don't think you can get much from there. One request to CMI India does not have authentic data on total infrastructure investment while government claims 7 to 8. This is beyond the scope of this presentation. All I will say is that CMI does capture information on infrastructure investment through its CapEx service. So if you are interested, you can reach out to your organization to access this database. Any views on youth unemployment? Professor Mehrotra did speak about this. It's quite high. 80% of all unemployed people are youth. The unemployment rate in youth is very high. This is an important question because what we see is that in all the economic shocks that happened in India, people who had jobs kind of maintained those jobs. Some of them did lose, but that's on the margin. The hit of all economic shocks went to people who are graduating and entering the labor market. They are the guys who suffered the most. So in 2016, the demonetization took away opportunities for the new graduates to find good jobs. Then the GST dealt a blow to people in the small sectors where jobs were being offered. Then you had the COVID and you had the slowdown in 2019-20. So one after another, the youth who were graduating from their schools, whether it is just doing an undergrad completion or doing a postgrad, completing a MBA course or becoming a chartered accountant, suddenly you found that the job opportunities had just collapsed. So this has really hurt youth employment opportunities, and the mental stress on them will not have been small. It will have been quite bad, particularly in the smaller towns, particularly in the towns where the opportunities are much lower than a place like Bombay and Delhi and Chennai and Bangalore, for example. So I think youth unemployment is a dreadfully serious problem, has had because this has been the case for several years now, its impact on their life cycle is going to be sustained, and therefore we should really worry about the number of people who have suffered because of lack of jobs. The organized sector, we have heard about IT companies giving job offers and taking it back, IITs not being able to place all their people in the first few rounds of employment calls. So it's quite stressful even for the well-educated people. So imagine what happens to those who are less educated, less privileged. So I think this is the most important and most distressful part of our story of development in recent times. Do you collect any data on youth NEET? That's more in the PLFS. We don't do this NEET. One has to crunch the data to be able to derive NEET from the CPHS. How are the platform workers classified in the CMI data? There is no clear distinction in the PLFS data. We have started, thanks to some responses to us from Delhi School of Economics, we have started capturing data on platform workers. I haven't crunched the data, but we have started capturing. Should focus much on manufacturing sector, or should India now focus on services sector as it missed the bus of manufacturing, as Raghuram Rajan argues? What this panel thinks, Professor Mehrotra is better equipped to answer this question. He is a big fan of industrial policy. I think India has opportunities in all sectors. We have the second largest arable land in the world. We just have got too many people employed over there. We require to exploit our agricultural opportunities better than we are able to, because we have just got too labor intensive. We require to have more technology there, more storage facilities, and so on and so forth. We equally well have a good manufacturing base as well. We have got minerals, we have got labor, we have got opportunities. And of course, services is the recent gem in our collection. Raghuram Rajan talks about a mix of manufacturing and services. He doesn't say no manufacturing. So the question is ill-designed when you say manufacturing or services. I think it's best that it is done as a package to know all the possible opportunities. But if you have a tax benefit only for manufacturing and not for services, only for some PLI schemes, we are doing a disservice to the opportunities and entrepreneurship in India. The last one. Oh, that's okay. Thank you so much. Would you like to come in, Professor Mehrotra, if I've missed something?
If I may, Dr. Charan Singh, may I?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. 5 or 6
In
points.
the meantime, I'm going to request anybody who has another question can raise your hand
Right.
and ask, just raise your hand, I'll call out. In the meantime, yes, Professor Mehrotra.
Right. So I'll sort of go in the reverse order because I was taking notes while the questions were being asked. So on this question of manufacturing versus services, it's, we are in that crisis zone where either or doesn't work. We have no choice but to develop an industrial policy, a manufacturing strategy, which unfortunately we still do not have. We don't. If you believe that PLI is a manufacturing strategy, I'm afraid it is not. You'll have to, Google me and read my work. I've written about it and so on. Or you can send me an email and I can send you a longer paper. The bottom line here is the following. For 25 years from after the economic reforms began, the contribution of manufacturing to GDP or DBA in our country was and has remained 17% all the way till 2014-15. However, on account of policy mistakes, manufacturing contribution to GVA actually fell from that 25-year average of 17%, as I had pointed out in my own presentation earlier occasion, to down to 13% till about 3 years ago. It has only just climbed back up. In fact, I think I said, and let me just repeat for your benefit, manufacturing employment has actually fallen for the first 5 or 6 years after 2015, and that is primarily on account of the policy-induced shock of demonetization and a poorly designed and a badly implemented GST, and then a national lockdown, which was quite strict and the strictest in the world and quite unnecessary. The result of all that, combined result of all that, in a slowing economy, even before COVID, was to bring down the manufacturing contribution to GVA, and total manufacturing employment actually collapsed. It's only in the last 1 or 2 years in the recovery phase that we have recovered to the 2012 level of absolute manufacturing employment of 60 million. It has gone just gone above it. So yes, Rajan is on the right track. We need to sort of course, make sure that we continue to earn foreign exchange from our comparative advantage in services, but that doesn't mean that we must not focus on labor-intensive manufacturing. That's why I talk about 7 or 8 components of a manufacturing strategy. You can actually access my paper. I'm going to move on. Second point is that on the NEET question, you see, youth are among those who are the most affected by the open unemployment rate that Mahesh was talking about. He didn't mention that their estimate, CMI's estimate of youth unemployment is over 40%. PLFS estimates that youth unemployment is now about only 10%, and it has come down. However, I just want to remind you why it has come down in the PLFS. It has come down only because the definitions of CMI and PLFS are different. The UFL, unpaid family labor, is counted as employment, and that's a main reason why that is the case. And having youth in agriculture is the last thing you want to see. And needs are those, you can estimate that. We've done that in using PLFS. Needs are those youth, i.e. between the ages of 15 and 29, who are not looking for work. They are willing to work, but not looking for work. Now, that's a very important distinction that Mahesh had made earlier on, and that distinction can be made from the PLFS data. And I mean, we discovered to our utter horror that in the last 5 or 6 years, that number went from 51 million in 2019 to over 120 million, not in education, employment, or training, the youth I'm talking about. And since then it fell, and it fell only because they started showing we are in agriculture and that we are unpaid family labor. Third, let's just remind ourselves that, anyone who's kidding themselves to believe that, oh, the unemployment situation is not grim. Actually, the economy has generated 8 crore jobs in the last 4 years, as the Prime Minister told us just 2 months ago, based on the RBI claims data. If you have looked at the RBI claims data, it's about the most incredible estimate that anyone would come up with. The fact of the matter is that the PLFS data shows rather, clearly, incontrovertibly, that 8 crore jobs have indeed been created in agriculture. And suicides of young unemployed used to be, as the NCRB data shows, in 2018, youth who were unemployed, their suicides were 3 per 2 hours. In 2022, that same number had increased to 2 per every hour. In other words, 2 youth are committing suicide who are unemployed every hour in our country. That should worry anyone. Of course, it's worrying the youth. And, it's a pity that Mahesh didn't talk very much about youth unemployment, although he mentioned the IIT number. The fact of the matter is that even the PLFS data is showing that 83% of all unemployed are youth, that the youth unemployment rate had tripled between 2012 and 2018, and it has come down, and it has come down only because of the employment in agriculture. On Mudra, turning to a fourth point, Mudra, let's just remember that some 90% of all Mudra loans are supposed to be less than 50,000 rupees. And in fact, the less than 50,000 rupee loans are, on average, their size is in the region of 28,000 rupees. Now, you tell me how much, how many days of work can you generate from 26 to 28,000 rupees? That's the size of a typical Mudra loan, which has to be also begun to be repaid after 3 years. So you have to generate enough from that 28,000 rupees income for you to make pakoras. And pakola will, if you are making pakoras using the thela you might have bought with that 28,000 rupees, will only fetch you a monthly income of 6,000 rupees per month for a family of 5, which is below the poverty line, Tendulkar poverty line, updated to 2022. Let me turn to this, number about the share market booming while the economy is also booming, etc. Well, Mahesh already reminded us. What we are seeing is lots and lots of evidence, I don't have the time to go into it, that there is a K-shaped recovery, and the so-called 8% growth rate numbers themselves are highly debatable. I think Dr. Charan Singh could organize a separate seminar, and I'd be happy to speak about this subject. There are real question marks about this. So let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any hand. So I presume that because there's very good presentation, and also because I understand that clarifications have been given elegantly, so I don't see any hand here. With that, okay, I just want to check if Bhaskar ji has a question, or Maninder Sachdev.
Yes, sir. I have a question, very small
Yeah.
question. Thank you,
Hmm.
Santosh, sir, for a brilliant presentation. And I just was wondering if you could answer me the impact of artificial intelligence on employment.
You want to take a shot at it, Mahesh?
Artificial intelligence versus the employment. Will it impact?
Well, it depends upon the time scale we are talking about, and it depends upon which way the technology goes. If I take a long-term view at this, and if I look at the skepticism that was there when computers were first introduced, I was a young economist at the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy at that time. I joined CMI in 1980, and computers arrived in 1984. CMI was one of the early adopters of computers, and there was a huge cry of computers displacing people and causing large amounts of unemployment in the banks and in the financial capital. We saw this huge problem that unions were kind of running against computers. What we have seen is a beautiful adoption of computers and the growth of employment, and India becoming a fantastic IT power in the world. I carry that same optimism regarding AI as well. I don't think we need to worry that AI is going to cause any unemployment. There are lots of horror stories written by Western commentators, journalists of a certain kind. Currently, the AI itself doesn't look as promising as computers looked promising in those days. There is so much of hesitancy and there's so much of confusion. I can tell you that I have been a user of AI in CMI itself to, to consider how productivity can be improved. And employment in CMI is growing because I'm hiring more people to do AI work, and there's no scope of this employment going down. So I remain optimistic. I don't see any reason why we should worry about AI hurting employment. We should embrace it and become superpowers with AI in our services sector and manufacturing sector. And that's also the story that Raghuram Rajan tells us.
Mahesh sir, what was I was worried about where we have driverless cars, we have driverless vehicles. So what will be the impact when we don't have we have got this kind of technology, driverless trains and all that?
Yes. So there will be no people who will sit and type the manuscript, to whom then we will give a correction to the manuscript type.
But we have,
And
sir,
there will be
we have a technology. The officer is speaking and the machine is typing, and there's no need of stenographers now.
correct. Exactly. There may be no need for drivers tomorrow, but that's not going to cause a problem because there are other people who are writing the software for the AI. So it's difficult to say what the future will be like. But the best strategy for India is to embrace AI and try to gain leadership in it rather than fight against it.
Let me move on to
Thank you,
Bhaskar.
sir.
Bhaskar? Mr. Bhaskar, do you want to ask a question? I see a hand is raised here by Mr. Bhaskar. Okay, so I think we have had an excellent discussion. The whole purpose of keeping this series was seeking clarifications and understanding the concept. I feel really fortunate that we have had all the people who have worked on these issues come and speak at EGROW. These are going to be available as on our website. Your discussion, Mehji, of what you have done today will be there by noon tomorrow. And I'm sure scholars who work on unemployment, employment issues, who look at databases, they're going to benefit a lot from our discussion today. Yes, Professor Mehrotra brought that point again. How many people are really unemployed? Is it 10%? Is it 3%? Very vexed question. These are complex questions. Is Pakoda Wala really employed? Is that the type of employment we're looking for? Those issues, of course, will be there. Are beggars employed? Are they self-employed? Are they entrepreneurs if they employ more beggars and bring them on contractual basis? These are conceptual issues. And yes, as an economist or as a statistician, obviously we have to grapple with these issues. We have to measure them. There'll be assumptions. Based on those assumptions, some figures will come. But what I'm happy is, at least we in the country are discussing these issues. And we are in a position to debate and then reach a well-informed conclusion. My own understanding from discussion the last 3 weeks is, yes, there are issues here, but these surveys sometimes have their own assumptions and definitions, and therefore they have to be very carefully interpreted. That's why I say such scholarly work needs a scholarly interpretation. These are very nuanced studies, and policy making is therefore very complex. It can't be done in waving a hand. With this, I want to thank Mahesh and Professor Mehrotra for having agreed to come and speak to us and provide these clarifications. Next weekend, on Friday, 4 to 5:30, we are discussing economy of Kerala, and this continues with our earlier series that we have done on states with the objective of learning from each other rather than learning from Germany, France, or Australia. Within the country, some states are doing so well. How come they're doing so well? Any lesson for us? And some states are doing so poorly. How come they're doing so poorly? Are there any pitfalls we need to avoid? We have done this series now, and in the meantime, Sanjeev Sanyal from Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has also done an excellent study, which we discussed a week earlier on our EGROW Foundation. We are going to continue with that journey. We are inviting Kerala now. We have Maharashtra, Bihar, Jharkhand, and then one state in Northeast to come and share their story with us. So next week we have Kerala, and week after we have from World Bank, their I think second in command in the economics department. Chief economist is of course our Indramit, but this is IN course. He'll be speaking on presentation on analytical chapter on public investment. So we will continue our journey to go deep into what's happening globally on 8th of November. Similarly, on 1st of November, 8th of November, 15th of November, we are into a similar exercise. I'll keep you informed of all these events which are coming up. Right away, would like to request you to pencil for November 1, Economy of Kerala. With that, let me once again thank each of the participants. I want to thank the speakers, especially Mahesh Vyas, for having agreed to come and share his thoughts with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed the show.